All right, that's enough for the entertainment part of today. My name is Christian Brim, and you are joining the webinar on PPP Part 2, or Part 99, whatever number you want to go. I am, one second, I had this all ready, and I screwed it up. I'm the worst. There, perfect. You can see my beautiful mug. Jeremy Doorn joins us. We couldn't get the Excel queen today to do the PPP loan, so we're stuck with Jeremy, but he'll do in a pinch. Yes, I am wearing a hat. I'm not entirely sure why. I like to put things on my head. Cowboy hat seemed, why not? So let's dive right into, we're going to go over the PPP as it was written, also as it is now available. And then we're going to touch on the employee retention credit, which is something else that was in the original CARES Act, but then was expanded and modified with the omnibus or the consolidated funding bill. So Jeremy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah,
you're on.
I'm on. So one thing I do want to remind people of that did pass this legislation, if people didn't know, is the taxability of the PPP forgiveness from the first round. That you are able now, it actually modified or changed what the IRS had said, that you weren't able to use those expenses. So you're now able to use those expenses for 2020 when you get it forgiven. Now with this new legislation, they did do Part 2 or 4,600, like Christian said, but they also, for the people that didn't get round one or forgot about round one, or it was closed before round one ended, they've reopened PPP round one. So you have to be in operation to on February 15th, 2020 to get it. You have to have less than 500 employees, and then you get 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. So there's no revenue reduction, anything like that. So if you haven't gotten round one PPP, you should probably look at doing it, especially now that we know that you can use those expenses. It's not going to count as income. This truly is free money. So
now you were telling me something before, clarifying, you have to, if you didn't do round one, you've got to do round one in order to get round two. In other words, you got to spend all the money from the first round before you can do the second.
Yeah, you got to spend it all on eligible expenses, basically, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be forgiven, because people are right now applying for forgiveness or whatever, but you have to have spent all of the money from your first PPP on eligible expenses. So if you took your PPP and went and bought a Ferrari, you might be out of luck as far as getting the second one. Just
there were people that did that.
I know, but you just don't tell anybody that.
I don't know why I didn't think of that. That's brilliant.
I've always wanted a Ferrari. It would have been a good idea. So
let me go back. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So everything, as far as round one, as long as your employees and your compensation are maintained for 8 to 24 weeks, the covered period, and 60% of your money spent on payroll, then it's forgiven in full. So,
and to clarify, that's two different look back periods, or not look back, but eligibility periods. There's 8 weeks or 24 weeks.
Yeah, covered periods, right? They're
covered periods. Okay.
Yeah. So you can take 8 or 24. You're going to get 2.5. I mean, for most people that we saw, I mean, you got 2.5 months worth of payroll, and then you got 2 months to 6 months to spend it. So it was typically not a problem. That 40% used on rent and all these other eligible expenses didn't really come into play for a lot of the clients. A lot of it was just mainly payroll based. So.
And the 60% on payroll, I know there was some confusion originally that, like, if I didn't spend 60% on payroll, then I didn't get any forgiveness, but that's not accurate, correct?
if you didn't spend, so like if you spent 50 on payroll.
Right. I mean, that just reduced the amount of the forgiveness. You're.
Yeah, reduce the amount. Yeah. So you can't get 100% forgiveness, but it doesn't take your forgiveness down to zero. It just reduces it.
It's not all or nothing.
It is not all or nothing. It's definitely it's a graded schedule. So,
okay.
So that's as far as round one. So if you haven't gotten round one, go get round one. Go get yourself some free money. Do it as soon as you can, and do it now. So,
what is this? Existing borrowers can apply with new eligible expenses. That has to do with forgiveness. So, like, if you haven't applied for forgiveness yet on your first round.
Yeah, if you haven't applied for forgiveness, or if you were needing, they expanded the eligible expenses, the non-payroll eligible expenses, to include like supplier costs that you had, as far as like supplies that you need to sell things, operations costs, so software, cloud computing services that you needed to put in place to continue business, property damage costs. I think they're all listed in PPP Round 2. I could have included them here, and then like worker protection expenditures. I know a lot of people have put in plexiglass or whatever, so all of those could be covered under the forgiveness terms. So again, a lot of that doesn't come into play, for those people where payroll wasn't enough to get them to the full forgiveness, then they have expanded all these eligible expenses as well.
Okay, before I move forward, I want to remind everybody that please put your questions in the question and answer, and we will answer them as we go. So that's at the bottom of the screen. And the disclaimer, don't put anything on there that you don't want shared with the interwebs. So, all right, round two, fight.
So here's round two. So they've modified it a little bit. I'm gonna go with a general statement here. Everything's basically the same as round one for all of you that got round one. It's very similar looking application. It's very similar criteria. Couple of things have changed for a lot of our businesses. They're not affected like this. Fewer than 300 employees. Round one was fewer than 500 employees. So they just made it more available to smaller employees rather than those 400 or 500 employee businesses. The biggest kick is you have to have had round one to get round two. You have to have fewer than 300 employees, and you also have to have 25% reduction in gross receipts in any quarter from 2020 over 2019. So that can be any quarter. So it doesn't have to be the full year. For those self-employed individuals that don't have a whole lot of quarterly reporting, you can take annual numbers and take it as a 25%, because if you've got 25% reduction annually, you probably have one quarter that's more than 25%. But even for those that don't, like I had a client the other day ask me if they were going to, if they should apply or if they had the 25% reduction. They weren't, for the year, they weren't down, but we did find one quarter where she was down 27%. So that's going to qualify, right? So, and it can be in any quarter, so it doesn't matter. And so it's the same thing as far as the amount that you can get this year or for this PPP. It's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, which I don't know when they expanded the payroll cost thing, because it was, and again, this might have been expanded in one of the versions of the first PPP, but at first it was just health insurance paid for by the company. Now they've expanded it to like dental, life, vision, all that stuff. So
all your group benefits.
All your group benefits, because I know that we had a discussion at some point. Was it just health or was it everything? What did they mean to include? Well, they have expanded it to everything. So that includes your wages, your health, any of your benefits, your 401k contributions, another benefit, and then your state level unemployment taxes. So, and you can take that. The first PPP, it was like the prior 12 months from your application day or whatever it was. It was a little confusing. They've simplified it. You can just use 2019 or 2020. Everything I read said either or, so I would just take either one and take the biggest one and multiply it by 2.5 times. They've also put in here, because the food service and accommodation industry, which is NAICS code 72, if you have one of those codes that start with a 72, you can get 3.5 times your monthly payroll service. So they've expanded it for those hard hit industries as well. Forgiveness is the same. Like I said, like I talked about earlier, they've got this expanded eligible expenses for the forgiveness, operations, property damage from looting, supplier costs, worker protection, all that kind of stuff. Again, I think a lot of our clients, it was just all this money was basically spent on payroll. We didn't even need to get into, I had clients asking me, should I give them my rent? I wouldn't. I would just give them the payroll because it covers your whole entire PPP and move on. And I think a lot of the lenders were the exact same way. So everything's basically the same. You just have to be able to show that 25% reduction. And
is the 60% of payroll still a part of the?
Yes, everything's exactly the same. 60% of it, at least 60% has to be spent on payroll. You've got to keep the same amount of employees. You can't cut anybody's salaries. All that stuff has to stay the same. If you want to go to, so we have a copy of the,
I've got a couple of questions
yes.
from the audience. Let me ask them real quick.
Right.
The question on the first round of PPP, is it required to have a reduction in receipts?
No.
Okay.
Nope. Everything's the same. Like everything that happened last year in that first round, which didn't, that's the only real difference minus the employee level and everything else. The real big difference is the revenue reduction. So that's why if you haven't had round one, and that's why you should go get round one before you go to round two anyways, because you're going to, whether you had a reduction or whether you did better in 2020, you're still you can still apply for round one.
Okay. Next question is, does the quarter have to be a set 3-month period, or could it be any 3-month period, such as February through April?
It's January through March, June through.
It's a calendar quarter.
Calendar quarters. There you go. Yes, calendar quarters. Yes.
Okay, but that doesn't apply for the first round. Just the second.
Just the second. Just this new one.
Okay.
For sure.
Next question. Does the unemployment benefits, I'm assuming, contribute to those quarterly numbers for self-employed persons? The question is, does PUA/unemployment contribute to those quarterly numbers for self-employed persons? I'm assuming they're talking about the reduction in receipts.
Yeah, whether or not it's receipts, I don't think it does. Everything I read was total income, and I don't think that was in there. If they had something in there where it said like dividends, interest, rent, all that stuff, unemployment wasn't listed in there as far as I know.
Okay. One more question. Are there any easy, there's the key adjective, sir. Are there any easy PPP forgiveness guidelines?
Easy guidelines.
Well,
I guess I don't understand. Like, I mean, they've made it, they have changed it to where I think it was 50,000 was the PPP forgiveness. At first, you could fill out the easy form, and then they boosted it up to 150. Anything under 150, you could fill out the easy form. Okay. And for just about all my clients, I mean, that new easy form is, like I said, most of it was on payroll. So all you had to do is get your payroll number in there, fill out, your employees, and turn it in. And it seemed like everything was pretty easy, if we want to say that. But that's
and we've got as a reminder, we'll go back and give the emails, and you're welcome to email either myself or Jeremy, and with some more specifics, and we'll be happy to answer your question.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so yeah, let's move on. You want to look at the application?
Yes, and I know there was a reason I wanted to look at the application, and I can't remember why. But so this is the application. It's basically the same thing as you had before. Well, not the first one. The first one I think was like 14 pages or something ridiculous.
Yeah. The very first one.
Yes, the very first one. So There's, I mean, it's pretty easy. I think some of the lenders actually do a lot of this stuff online too. Like you can log in and do some sort of portal type application. I
Right.
think I don't. Um,
I've
but
seen a lot. I've seen a lot of banks do that now, both on the application and the forgiveness side.
yeah, they're trying to be more efficient with all the money they're making from the SBA fees they're getting. So why not?
No banker jokes. We're not gonna dig on bankers.
No. But so it's literally, filling in your information, your average monthly payroll, multiplying it by 2.5 or 3.5, putting your employees in, and then the purpose of the loan. Again, they expanded that to some of these supplier costs, property damage, all this other stuff. I assume most people are just going to use it for payroll costs because that seems to be where everything was spent. And then, like I said, there's a line on here. You got to put in your first draw SBA loan number. So there's that. And then there's this receipt reduction. So some people are going to be asking, how do we show this? Well, in the interim final rules, it basically just says you got to either show like by bank statements or by quarterly financials or anything that you got to show gross receipts. And it shows here, and it says it in there, that if it's under 150, you actually don't have to provide anything, any proof of the 25% reduction. But when you go to get it forgiven, you're going to have to give that 25%. So you might make sure that you have a 25% reduction before you turn this in, because if you don't, I'm assuming it's not going to be forgiven. There's not a lot of talk on whether it's going to be forgiven or not. If you're going to use annual in here and you're not going to use quarter because you're self-employed and you're just going to use totals from the 2 years, you can just write annual in where it says quarter, as far as that goes. And then you just put in your gross receipts. If you're over 150, it's pretty straightforward.
And you raised a point. So if for any reason the loan isn't forgiven, it has to be paid back within 2 years.
5 years.
5 years? 5 years.
5 years. They ended. It started at 2 years or whatever it was, and then through however many iterations, it's 5 years and it's 1%. So still not the worst.
There could be worse loan terms.
You could get a way worse loan term. So not the worst thing, but they shouldn't be required. I don't know if the lenders are going to require it. Some lenders might require it up front just to make sure that, this is going to be forgiven or whatever.
Yeah, because they don't want to come chase you.
No, that's so. But so yeah, then you just list the owners, fill out a couple yes or no's. Make sure you've never been, a felon or whatever. And then the second page is just some initials on, yes, I'm a business. I'm in, it hasn't ended. I had a business. Remember, you have to have business as of February 15th, 2020, and it can't be permanently closed. So that was the same with the first one. It's the same with this one. If you don't have gross receipts in 2019, there's some different things where you can do like the first quarter in 2020 versus the last quarter of 2020 to show the 25% reduction as well. So you don't necessarily have to be opened in 2019, but so you can use 2020 numbers versus 2020.
Okay. I've got some more questions. First one, if you are only now eligible for the PPP and haven't filed your payroll for 2020, do company draws count towards payroll estimates?
They do not. Nope. It's got to be payroll.
Got to pay payroll taxes on it, be on a W-2 or a Schedule C.
Or Schedule C. Yeah, it's got to be, you got to have self-employment income, self-employment or payroll taxes. Same thing.
Okay.
For sure.
Is there anyone that we can call for help on forgiveness applications? Absolutely. Jeremy is your huckleberry. What? No, you're not the huckleberry? You can email. I don't know about call because I could give you Jeremy's cell phone, but I'm afraid what you might text him. So we'll give you the email and absolutely reach out with questions on that forgiveness application. Next question. Can I have more detail on keeping the employees? What if an employee was hired after receiving the PPP and fired about 2 months later? Does that disqualify for forgiveness?
Well, I mean, if you hired them after you got the PPP, you wouldn't have included them in your original PPP, and then you won't include it in the forgiveness. So I would say it's probably not going to affect anything.
Yeah, and I think I don't think, I know that if you had to terminate for cause, or
Yeah.
if they quit, that doesn't count against you.
Yeah, and everything's the same as the first one too, right? So like the easy form you could use if it was under 50, now it's 150, and it was like if you had less than 25% reduction, then it didn't even really matter. Like it was just, it didn't, like there was a whole bunch of calculations at first, like you lost one employee or whatever, then
Oh my God, that spreadsheet was, it was awful.
Yeah, that's why I'm not the spreadsheet queen or king. But yeah, so there's a bunch of safe harbors, like if they were fired for cause, or they left and you couldn't find anybody to replace them or anything like that. But I mean, if you hired somebody in that covered period and then got rid of them in the same time, it's not going to affect your beginning or ending number. So I wouldn't worry about it.
We got lots of questions. I got another one. I have cut the hours of my one employee for the time being until and unless I get the second PPP loan. Will there still be a safe harbor provision that allows forgiveness as long as you have brought your employees level back up to the same number by the end of the covered period? Or do you have to be at full employment level for the entire covered period?
No, there's still the safe harbors. Everything that's in place from the first PPP is identical to the second PPP, including forgiveness. Now, I think I read something in there that the SBA could change stuff. Well, the SBA could change stuff anytime, obviously, and they did a lot last year. But as of now, everything is exactly the same, minus the 25% reduction and like the employee stuff and like the eligible expenses for forgiveness. They expanded some of that stuff, but everything else is exactly the same. So yes, there is still a safe harbor for getting those hours back.
Okay. So to make sure my steps are correct, I did get round one. Now I have to file for forgiveness. If approved, I'm eligible to file for round two. I don't think you have to have it forgiven.
No, you don't have to be approved yet. You don't even have to have filed for forgiveness yet. You just have to have spent your entire PPP loan, your first PPP loan on eligible expenses. So if you spent it and it's going to be forgiven, go apply.
Now, this is a very interesting one, and I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm going to ask you. What if the ownership is in limbo due to death of previous owner in 2020?
I mean, I guess you'd have to. I don't know that would affect whether or not you can get it unless it changed hands from like one person to a completely separate owner. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you had a corporation and somebody bought the stock of that corporation, I don't think it would affect it because the corporation is the one getting the PPP loan, right? I mean, if you had some sort of asset sale and it's a completely separate business, I think you probably can't get it.
Yeah, I'm thinking it would be if it was a Schedule C, because the person is the business. There's not anything separate unless it was a single member LLC that was filed on the Schedule C. Then I would say it would be like any other corporate entity, and it would be the estate. The estate now owns it. But as long as the business is still in business, you should be fine.
Yeah, I was going to say, as long it's got to be in business. I mean, if somebody dies and the business dies with it, then you can't go back and get the money. I mean, but because it's permanently closed. But I would say if it's still going, I would say, yeah, it would just be, it would depend on how that structure is laid out.
Okay. One more question. Can you count 1099 miscellaneous expenses paid to another LLC?
For the monthly payroll cost? No, and the reason that go ahead.
Well, no, it didn't say. So go ahead.
Well, and I think there's two sides to it. So for the initial, how much can I get in PPP? It's based on payroll monthly, 2.5 times your monthly payroll cost, right? So your monthly payroll cost does not include 1099 contractors, and the reason it doesn't include 1099 contractors is because 1099 contractors are self-employed and can go get their own PPPs. So you can't include those into your PPP because that's double dipping. Now, if you're paying a 1099 contractor to come out and put up fiberglass or whatever, plexiglass or whatever they're doing, that might be one of the eligible costs that you can include in your forgiveness when you're trying to get forgiveness.
I'm trying to envision a counter with fiberglass. I don't think. Yeah,
the hat's throwing me off. It's definitely plexiglass. Yeah.
Right.
And it's way cheaper than fiberglass, I would assume, but whatever.
All right. Last question. If all employees are retained, but payroll was reduced after fulfilling PP1, does that disqualify us for PP2?
Nope. The only thing that would disqualify you from PPP2 would be if you're not an eligible business, you weren't open before February 15th, you had more than 300 employees, or you didn't have a reduction in a 25% reduction in revenue, or you don't have any payroll, or you're not self-employed.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to the employee retention credit. This was, like I said, in the original CARES Act, along with the PPP loan. It didn't get a lot of press because everybody was thinking about free money with PPP. The effect of the employee retention credit, though, is essentially free money. So it is a refundable credit against your 941 liability that is essentially for the same purposes of PPP loans. Originally, the credit was set up that if you did forgiveness for a PPP loan, and then you couldn't get the credit, and vice versa. So in 2020, it was either or. And the employee retention credit required you to have passed this gross receipts test where you had a 50% reduction in gross receipts. So that didn't apply to some businesses, a lot of businesses. So we didn't see a lot of the employee retention credit last year. But they expanded it in 2021, and I wrote that 30%. It's actually 20%.
I think you wrote that wrong.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That 30% should be 20%, which is actually, the PPP is 25% reduction in revenue. So the employee retention credit is only 20%. So even if you don't qualify for the second round of PPP, you want to look at the employee retention credit and see. The credit is $10,000 of wages per quarter for the first 2 quarters, okay? And it's 70% of that amount. So if you've got, let's say, an employee and you pay them at least $10,000 a quarter, you're looking at 70% of $10,000 for each quarter. That's $14,000 in credit. So there's no provision for any other expenses. I mean, it's just the payroll costs. So you don't get any of the expanded expenses like you did under the PPP. Also, with the new act, they allow the employer to get the credits before they file their 941s. There's a form to fill out to get those, and the amount that they'll prepay you is not 100%, but essentially you can get the money before you have to pay the payroll.
Well, and Christian, I read too that I think on that advance payment, you can also just not make your 941 deposits and not pay penalties and interest, and then it reconciles on the 941s as well. I don't know all the details of all of that, but that's another thing. You don't necessarily need to apply for the advance credits either.
That's true, because the penalties and interest are still waived. That's a great point. Less paperwork, Jeremy. I like your idea better.
I'm all about no paperwork.
That's all right. Nancy and crew hadn't figured out that you actually had an answer. They didn't need to supply a credit. You were already on it. So I have another question here. Do I understand correctly that if you were an LLC partnership in 2019 and changed to an S corporation in 2020, we are eligible using the 2019 tax filings to apply. In other words, if they, same business, they changed entity structure, does that keep them from participating in either of these?
Absolutely not. I mean, I would look to see, we were talking about PPP, right? Before we get.
Well, it didn't say, but I assumed.
Okay. Yeah, both are eligible entities. And so I would just look at 2019 or 2020, whichever one you paid more wages in, so you can get a bigger PPP for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would. Does it make any difference if the ownership changed between 19 and 20?
No,
Okay.
I mean, ownership really doesn't have anything to do with anything, right? I mean, it's really just about the business getting money to cover employee costs. Now, if you're an employee, then that's great. If you're not an employee because you're a partnership or whatever, then, I don't think that just affects maybe how much you can get, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, the attribution rules for commonly owned entities, it would come into play there, but
yeah,
we're not going to go into that. All right, so I am going to move to any final Q&A. Do you have any further comments while we're waiting to see if there are questions?
No, I did, because I was thinking about this, and I didn't mention that the second round of PPP is open until March 31st of 2021. So if you're out, I haven't read anywhere, like the first time they let this PPP out, it was like, oh my gosh, go get the money because it's going to be gone. I haven't really read that a whole lot this time, and I think the Treasury Department expects it to all be there that need it until March 31st. Not to saying that it won't run out, but
well, and to that point, I know that there was an order of funding in the bill as far as setting aside a certain amount for small businesses, those that are in disadvantaged opportunity zones, that kind of thing. So there's a preference as to the funding so that the small businesses don't run out of money.
Yeah. So but don't go get it all. But
I would say do it sooner rather than later.
I would as well.
Absolutely. Why not?
Why not?
Let's see. We have one more question on the employee retention credit 2021. Could you give an example of how this breaks down? If there is one employee at $10,000 per quarter, does that mean that you get a credit on payroll taxes up to $7,000? Great question. It is not on the payroll taxes. It is a refundable credit. So it's not just on the employer's portion of the FICA that they have to pay. It's just that they are reporting it on the 941. So you're not limited to the amount of liability that you as the employer have. It's just the way they're collecting the information for. Yes?
All right. Yeah. Sure.
All right, let me go back to the beginning and put up the email addresses. That's my fat face. This is my skinny face in a hat. cbrim@coregroupus.com, jdoorn@coregroupus.com. Jeremy, you can write in either English or Spanish. He is from the Albuquerque.
Don't start doing that. People are going to start
from the 505. All right, Jeremy, thank you very much. Thank you all for attending, and we'll wave until the camera is, I'm not really good at ending these, but we're going to wave until the camera go by.
Bye-bye.